Tonight we're doing the salt shaker. Pepper shaker, the only thing that changes is one drill bit size on it, but the steps remain the same. So we'll go through all the steps to make that. We'll see how we're doing time-wise. A couple of blocks of wood we'll start with. These are American elm, came from George. Gonna lay out centers on them. I don't always go and get my straight edge and mark corner to corner. I usually have some kind of writing utensil handy, and I tend to know where my fingers are. Mounting this between centers. I've got the check. There's a knot that came through here, so a little bit of a bias grain on it. But I'm going to put that on my tailstock end. It'll be much easier to work with. Got a check on both sides. This side looks clean. That'll end up being the side I want to use anyway. And those checks will end up not being used or turned away. So no problem there. All right, now as we start, before I get going on this and start doing any turning, let's talk about a couple of things. My tool rest is set at standard tool rest height. And by that, when I place my tool level on the rest, the cutting edge is at center. I'll talk about if I'm cutting or I've got my handle up or down, depending on tools that we use. I'm trying to think, probably won't be using any scraper, so I don't have the handle down. But I'll talk about standard tool rest height as we go. If you look at my gouge and straight down on, you can see in the picture, if you're looking at the left-hand wing, I'm going to call that wing A. Up right in the center, there's a red line, and it is B at the center of my gouge, and the right-hand wing is going to be C. A, B, C. So as I'm talking and using this tool, I'll be telling you what wing I'm using, but I'll be calling out rather than right hand, left hand, and you've got to do that math. I'll say A, B, or C, and you figure out do the mental gymnastics to get which wing I'm talking about. Also on my tool handle, you see a red line coming down the center of the flute and all the way down the handle on this one. It's not so much on my spindle gouges, but there will be the red line. And then there's green lines on the side. Red is the international color for stop, danger. So if I can see that red line, I want to be cautious. Spindle work, we do see the red line when I'm talking about face grain work, bowls and platters and that, and I'm using bowl gouges. Typically, I don't want to see that red line. I want to see green lines. But this tape on the handle and then the flute, the colors also help you see in your two-dimensional world on the screen what the tool is and how I'm manipulating it versus my three-dimensional world. So hopefully I'll be able to help you understand better of what we're doing. First of all, I do have, as we're talking personal safety, I've got safety glasses on. These are Z87s. They don't have the side shields because they give me headaches. I'm also going to be wearing a face shield. That doesn't mean I'll always remember to put it down, and probably I'll have it blocking the camera sometimes. That's not because I don't want you to see. It's because I'm not all that bright. Here we go. First of all, I'm just going to round this up, put a tenon on it, and then we'll start on the next piece on there. But I want to show you some of the cuts that the spindle roughing gouge makes. Can you hear me fine with the face shield down? First thing, I am going to turn my potentiometer all the way down to minimum. And then bring the speed up. I'm locked between centers. As far as the tension on the quill lock, honestly, that's about all the tension I want on it. I want to still be able to move the quill in and out, and usually in, because as I start cutting, The drive centers tend to want to sink a little bit deep. A little bit of pressure on a cone center, that's going to sink a little bit deep. Speed, let's talk about that a little bit too. I've got a 3-inch diameter piece of wood here. I've got a lathe that's capable of 3,000 RPMs. There is a good formula Del Nish came up with many, many years ago of calculating a safe and efficient lathe speed. The diameter of the blank times the RPM of the lathe should equal between 6,000 and 9,000. Well, 3 inches in diameter, that's going to tell me right there, if I'm below 2,000, I'm not turning fast enough to cut efficiently, and I'm going to get a thump, 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 thump. At 3,000 RPMs, I'm cutting fine. At 4,000 RPMs, we need a different lathe. So it's not, this lathe won't do it, it only has a max of 3,000. But that's good if I'm turning a pen on a lathe like this, I'm at 3,000 RPMs. It's just, I know it doesn't cut as efficiently. That doesn't take into consideration any cracks, checks, defects in the blank or anything like that. So you may be well underneath that formula and still have an unsafe piece that you've got to be aware of. So again, personal safety, make sure everything's locked down as I bring up my speed. There's 1,300 RPMs, almost 14, and you hear that there's a little bit of a thump as I go down. Now, grain direction I didn't even cover that. We're working with spindle work here tonight, so I've got my grain going this direction here, right through there. You can see with the, and my cuts are going to go small or large diameter to small. I'll never cut small to large on the outside of this piece. It's always large to small. (2,000 RPMs, we start to hear a little bit of the cooling fan in the motor, but the gouge glides through the work much easier. I've got the bevel pointed in the direction that I want to go. The bevel is the ground surface of the tool. And anchor on the rest, find the bevel, lift the handle, slide down the blank. I don't pull back into the oncoming wood. It's going large diameter. I'm going to make multiple steps. Once I am down close to a cylinder, I can cut in both directions with this tool as long as I'm on the bevel. The bevel gives me control. I'm getting about a pretty good gap here between my tool rest and my work, and what happens when I reach too far over the rest is I come from the handle pointed down and the bevel making contact here and making a supported cut on that cutting edge. I lift the handle, I come off the bevel, and I scrape, and my tool goes dull in about 3 seconds. See, if I continue after my tool's dull, I'm just wasting my time. I'm spending more time, and I'm not getting as clean a finish. Okay, ran the back of the gouge across there, didn't feel any bounce. I got a little bit of cut surface still here on there. Let's cut that. We'll cut one more cut on that. Make sure I'm under that surface. The cut that I'm making here is a pilling cut. P-E-E-L. I know I speak with a Utah accent. And people that don't know any better say I sometimes have a southern drawl, but they're obviously not from the South, because no Southern would accept me, right? Am I right here? Yeah. Okay, so my pill cut, I am on the bevel, I'm straight across, and I come across. I can go either direction because I'm not leading the tool in either direction. And that doesn't leave me with too bad of a surface here. It's not the best. I'm going to go ahead and mark part of that surface off because I don't need this block of wood immediately. And we're going to work a couple of cuts on this blank, and then I'll pass it around. Now, if I do take that same pilling cut and I tip the gouge in one direction or the other, and I lead with about a 45-degree slicing angle at B, and I'm going to go that way, it's towards the camera. Doesn't matter which way I go unless the grain's being stubborn. Sometimes a bias grain will want to be stubborn. That's a 45-degree slice. If I need to have a cleaner surface than that, I can raise the handle up a little higher to about a 70-degree slice. And that'll give me an even cleaner cut, typically. Much over about 70 degrees, you start to close off the flute, the gouge, the cutting edge. You're coming up too high, and it's not allowing wood in there into the flute of the gouge because it is closed, and it's butting right into end grain fibers at that time. I've got to have the handle slightly down so I don't bite into end grain fibers. Now, this is my gouge. I bought this gouge. I paid for the whole thing. I didn't pay for just the tip of it. They charged me for all of it. I sharpened all of it. So I ought to be able to use all of it, right? So the next cut I'm going to show you, and anywhere that I'm supported over the center of gravity by the tool rest, I can cut. So I can have the red line straight up like this, and I'm cutting on wing A going towards the tailstock. That's going to be about a 70-degree slice. Now, if you're noticing the shavings coming off of there and catching in my hand, and those are some very fine curls. They're not ribbons at all. We'll discuss that here in a minute too. They're nice curls, so we'll mark that as 70 degrees wing A. But like I said, I bought the whole gouge. I want to use wing C. I can use wing C. Be hard to start right here and go that way because I'm on the edge. I'm going to use wing A as I come around. I'm just going to use the opposite side. I'm going to push from the headstock or from the tailstock towards the headstock simply because it's hard to start the tool, any tool, out in space. 70 degrees. The gouge not only appears to be upside down, it almost is. I slow down my traverse as I come across. I'm running one hand trying to catch those shavings, but those look like something that would come off of a skew chisel. Very nice, very clean, and oftentimes this tool will outcut a skew chisel. Simply, especially in a bias cut grain, bias cut wood. By that you can see how when I say bias, the grain is turning a little bit here. As that comes out. Saws don't cut wood with the grain, so they'll come back. Let's see, this was a 70 degree, it was wing A, but it was upside down. Okay, next piece of wood. Give that a spin by hand, make sure it turns clear. I'm talking about getting some of that bias grain wood. I've got cathedrals running through here, so I've got bias wood. This might be interesting to actually grab my skew chisel and see what happens with the skew chisel cut on the outside of this before we get too carried away. And I wasn't smart enough to put a tenon on that piece while I had it, but we'll get it. Bring that up to speed. And I'll get it down to a round fairly quick. You can hear how much harder that hits the wood because I'm coming into that bias grain. It doesn't want to slice like the first piece did. It's a little bit noisier. It's arguing with me a little bit. And you notice as I'm working this tool, I'm at the front of the handle, but the back of the handle's in my side. I get the stability from being in my side. Okay, almost down to round. As I'm pushing towards the headstock, my feet shift towards the headstock. Handle's in my side and I'm shifting my weight. Then I come back, get a half step to my right. I'm going to take a quick second and look this over, see if there's anything that jumps out at me. It says it ought to be on the top or the bottom. Nothing really. Go ahead and put my dovetail on it. The corners are nipped on my spindle roughing gouge. So they'll come in and rough that corner out for me. I can finish refining it with a skew or a spindle gouge. Well, we're talking about various cuts, and I got this piece of wood. I'm going to make a skew cut and just see what happens with it. I'm also trying to figure out how this piece of wood's going to finish for me at this time, plus share with you a couple of insights, hopefully. So again, working towards the tailstock. I could go towards the headstock either way, but I'm going towards the tailstock. I've got about a 45 towards a 70-degree slicing angle on my skew, and I felt a couple of times where something has plucked. It's kicked back on me. Let's see if we can spot it right there. It broke those fibers out, and it broke out fibers right there on that cathedral, just like we had talked about. So I've got broken fibers right there on the cathedral, and that's where I've got bias grain coming through here, and the skew is hitting into end grain fiber. The reason the spindle roughing gouge will cut that surface clean and the skew won't is the skew is lifting that fiber higher, and so the tool digs in. It has more top pressure and forces the bevel in than the spindle roughing gouge, making the same cut. And I'll run this again with, I'm going to go with wing C right up to that same point where it's pulled out with the skew. So we're comparing apples to apples. You didn't hear any of that jump or that kicking back, and I didn't feel anything. And so when I come back right over there to where it was pulling out, that's not plucking out on me. So that's a much better surface there. It also tells me if I start cutting with proper direction, I can outcut my spindle roughing gouge will cut better than my skew will on this piece of wood. Well, I've got this, and we'll take one step further. A couple of other cuts that this is capable of. One, I can use one of the long wings and do a peel cut there to level stuff off. With the corners nipped back, I could come right up to a square shoulder on a pummel or a bead and come right up to it. But the cut that most of us are familiar with, that we make especially as we're first learning how to use a spindle roughing gouge, is not a cut. We've got the handle up, it's level. and we scrape. It moves wood, but it leaves us with ribbons, and I've got some ribbons that came off there. Let's get some more ribbons. Or dust as the tool goes dull. And that wears our cutting edges off very quickly. And dull tools are never fun, but worse than that, it leaves us with a terrible finish on the wood. And I don't want to have that torn grain in there on my finished piece, because then I get the opportunity to buy the most expensive tool that most wood turners buy: sandpaper. You would buy lots of it in little installments, right? Okay, so let's put this into a chuck. Let me clean this off. I'll draw a little bit here. So let me clean this off my magic eraser. That the interior, what I'm going to come do is I'm going to come in, cut a shoulder, and then come up, and it had to have a dome in there. And then we're going to cut a second piece out of the piece that's going around. We're going to cut a piece that'll fit in here and has a stem that comes up through. In that stem, we're going to drill a hole here, cut a funnel shape here. That's one, how I fill it with the salt and or pepper, and two, how I dispense it with the salt or pepper. So when that's turned over and turned upside down and filled through here, this cavity fills with salt. When I turn it over, the salt goes to this cavity. When you use it, you shake it. Now, this, I was taught this had to be perfectly smooth and dome shaped, and if it wasn't, it wouldn't work. Because salt comes up here, hits the dome, and bounces for that hole. And I'm like, really? Salt's not that smart. So I'm in my own shop after Alan had taught us to do that, and I'm like, what if I did everything wrong? What would be the worst case scenario? Well, worst case scenario, what if I made that thing flat? What if it had a little dimple in there? Oh, now I'm talking a Forstner bit. But now I make this project quick, easy, and everybody can repeat it. So we'll come in, I'm going to true this up, we're going to drill a couple of holes really quick, and then we'll start working on the outside and the funnel. Does that make sense? All right, same things apply for my, you almost thought I was going to cut, didn't you? Same rules apply to my spindle gouge. I've got a red line going down the center, A, B, and C bevels, but this is ground with a fingernail grind. Standard tool rest height, and I'm going to come in with the handle level. Once I've got a place for the bevel to ride, I'm going to drop the handle and arc towards center. I can also rotate counterclockwise if I need a little bit more speed, which I don't. It's wanting to pick up a chatter. Should be able to move that tailstock out of the way since I am in a chuck. Bring the rest around the front. And you can see that cut a little better. I've got my tool rest dial, so back far enough that I'm not resting on the bevel of the tool. Standard tool rest height, flute closed, bevel makes contact, handle drops. The path of least resistance is an arc. You heard that cut. Now, that was clever of me to just drop that. Can you believe they let me play with sharp tools? If I keep the handle level, doesn't like that, does it? You can hear it scream at me, I'm not happy. If I open up, it quiets up a little bit, and what happens when I do that is I'm changing the position of B to a better slicing angle. This is what I was talking about earlier. If I don't have my slicing angle open, it doesn't cut. Right there, it's not open. gets under that wood, creates a wedge, and wants to split wood. By dropping the handle, I also do open the cutting angle or the slicing angle of the gouge, and I allow that tool to cut. Slow down at the center, don't push that nub off, don't break those fibers out. I want a place for my drill bit to start. So just the tip of my skew. If you don't get it in the first 2 tries, try to get it on the 3rd time. I had a little inverted cone, or a little cone inside that inverted cone on there. So let's set that there and drill a couple of holes. What drill bits do I have? I've got 1 1/8" and 1 3/8", and it doesn't matter. But why did I pick these 2? Because if you've ever made a pepper mill, you probably own these 2 drill bits, even if you don't own a full set. I usually want to have about a 1/4 difference, and I can size it for any piece of wood that I've got. So I picked these 2 just because they're standard with many wood turners. I don't need a lot of speed. I'm under 500 RPM, and then I'm just going to advance this in. First step is going to go in. Your American elm, I have American elm where I'm at, and it is not as dense as this. I like your American elm a lot. When they squeak, a little paste wax sometimes helps that. Don't keep drilling with those Forstner bits. Let the shavings get bound up behind you. Stop and clear those. If you don't stop and clear those shavings, you will bind that drill bit inside that hole. Then you have to turn all that fancy wood away to get to the drill bit. Set that aside for now. I want to get just a little bit more depth. Right now I'm that deep. Doesn't matter. I can get a little bit more depth in there. Set that there. I want to open this up since I didn't have the drill bit going. I'm going to grab a scraper. This is a little version of my box scraper. I have them in different sizes. I'm going to just plunge straight in against that end grain 1/4 inch. Lining up the scraper with the bedways of the lathe so that I hopefully make a straight cut back in. There's my shoulder. My tool rest is set at just about center line, and in fact that's a good view in the top right. You can see the tool is slightly undercut. It's ground here, and I am cutting above center so the wood is falling away from the tool and not into the tool. If I've got the tool rest low and I'm trying to cut at center, the wood's going to push the tool in. If you've ever gone in, tried to scrape something and it always keeps getting smaller at the back, your tool rest is too low. And remember, with the scraper, we always want to have the handle up anyway. So that does make a difference. Since I've now got room for another 1/4 inch deep on that drill bit, I'll go ahead and put that drill bit still in there. I'll sneak it out of that shaft or out of the chuck a little bit. That'll get me a little bit deeper. That'll get me a 1/2 inch deeper, which will give us more volume. If I didn't mention before, this is literally the boring part of the demo. I got plenty of bad jokes. That comes out of here. I forgot to put a tenon on this blank while I had it in the chuck, so we'll do that now. New piece, new mounting, everything's different. My lathe goes to the safe. Did we lose there? Okay. My lathe goes to the safe speed of 0 and then comes back up to speed. First size is at 1 3/8. Set my calipers against my drill bit. Peel cut with a skew. This is a traditional skew as far as it's got a straight edge. A radiused edge actually makes a peel cut nicer. I didn't bring one with me, but that's just finding I'm getting up underneath the anchor to the rest, find the bevel, get underneath that lead edge and arc towards center. Now one drawback here is as I make that initial cut, it wants to lift the fiber right there on the edge. If you can see that, a scrape doesn't lift the fiber. So if I can't afford to have that fiber raised, I start with a scrape, drop the handle, find the bevel, and arc towards center. Okay, still just a little bit bigger than my caliper. That's fine. Start to sneak up on that. A little smaller than my caliper. This is what it's actually got to fit. And somebody's got a little taper in their hole. Might have to address that before I get too carried away. Well, that'll work. We'll be able to jam fit to it too. So that'll work. So right there, this piece of wood is actually gonna line up and sit in there. I'm gonna cut a funnel, cut a shoulder on this. This is the interior funnel that I showed you. So the first thing I'm going to do is start to cut that funnel. Two possible cuts here. One, bevel riding cut. Two would be end grain hollowing cut and scrape. Since I am directly into end grain, this is going to be a much easier way of getting that funnel shape started and be less likely to have a nice little spiral catch because I'm scraping that surface, and because I'm into a consistent grain surface of all end grain, it actually comes out with a fairly decent surface. I don't have to worry about it being a lot of torn out fiber. The other cut, as I said, would be a bevel riding push cut. That's going directly into the end grain fiber. Kind of the hard way to get there. And what that leaves behind me are compression rings from the bevel as I come across there. Sanded and finished, those would be harder to get out than the scrape surface that was scraped clean. Can you see those? You can't see those rings. They're right there, they're there, and they're evenly spaced. As that bevel comes over the edge, it's going to literally kind of walk down into that surface. And that, as that heel touches and compresses, it burnishes those fibers. And you'll sand that and think you've got a clean surface, and then you put a finish on it and they go pop, and you've got these concentric rings. Concentric rings are always interpreted as a flaw on something like that. If people can't figure out why they're there, they're not decorative, why are they there? Then people are going to say that's a flaw. Now, while I've got this here, what did I do with my little scraper? This will do it. I'm looking for my little box scraper. I don't know where I set it, so I'm going to come in with the skewed. Not the best choice because it typically doesn't run a cylinder. That'll give me something if I need to turn this around and jam chuck it to hold it with. On there, I've also got, if you got a set of small pin jaws and you want to turn this around and turn it that way, you could hold on to that little shoulder right there. And it ends up being just kind of a decorative feature on the inside of the piece. This is a 3/32 drill bit. If I'm doing a pepper shaker, I use a 5/32 drill bit. Let the drill bit find center. You could certainly put it in the tailstock. Stop and clean the swarth out of there and get that as deep as you can. Now, that is running, starting to check things for depth. It's running about right in there on that groove right there. As I look at what I've got in this blank, there's my overall depth of my drill hole. That's plenty long enough. I want to actually come up about 2/3. Remember, it's going to sit right there. I'm going to split that into 1/3 sections and be 1/3, 2/3. So I'm going to want to finish somewhere in there for overall height, if that makes sense. Then you've got 1/3 to fill down in the bottom, turn it over, and you've got that. So this is more than long enough for me, so I'll come back to that in a minute. Now I need to come in and just start to taper this down so that I've got a cylinder or a stem that goes up through the center. I don't want to get too thin too fast. Because I'm not supported, and that would be problematic. I'm using a gouge, but any tool would work, including coming in with just a parting tool and taking little bites. And when you're done, you'll still be able to tell people you sanded it to 600 grit inside, because this will be plugging up the opening. Now I do have to remember I've got that step. Grab the smaller of the two bits, the interior bit, because I can't actually check this against the piece until I separate it. That's another reason why to give yourself an escape route of having a shoulder that you could possibly grab. That is smaller than the drill bit, So I'm not concerned about that being too small. It's going to register on the outer ring and the shoulder. So being smaller in there is fine. That'll go in there. Now I want to get this stem brought down. Remove some of this extra wood. Being mindful of what wood I may have taken out of the inside of that. There's plenty of wood there. If your drill bit has wandered while you drill this hole, and you'll know it if it has or hasn't, it'll vibrate on you if it's wandered. But if that drill bit has wandered, you might have it tapering out here, so be aware of that. That should be, ow, that helped. If you didn't hear it, and I'll tell you what I did, I jammed that tip right into the side of the lathe bed. Where's my marks? There's my marks that I was looking at. That's going to sit there. If I part that off right there, that should be in, give me about a 1/3, 2/3 split. My square part, or my narrow parting tool's back on the other bench. That's 2 steps back. Skews right here, tool at hand, oftentimes is the proper one. The drill bit did drift a little bit, not totally unexpected. But salt will still find that hole. It's there. Even though that's slightly off center, salt will still find it. Salt's like a bunch of little ball bearings anyway. They roll around in there. You don't have to get too fancy. I don't taper those down in. It gets way more salt than I want. That should fit in, and where that's kind of popping into place, I don't put it in. A handy tip is if you have a grabber screw that you can just reach down in, do 1/8 of a turn, get something to bite it. We'll talk also while I'm thinking about it. Before how's that for a grain match? It's not bad. Before I would put a drop of glue in there, I would take, or a couple of drops of glue, line up my grain match, put a little glue on this shoulder or this shoulder here, and then line my grain match up and put them together. So there's the funnel part of it. Now let's talk about how do we chuck this up. So check, I don't quite fit. I'm going to erase that and go to a cylinder and start a new taper. Much shallower taper. Don't really need to remove that, but it bothers me. It wasn't necessarily in the way because the hole's so deep. There I've got 2 burnish lines, really quick on that. If you look right down there, you see one there, one there. My fit is going to be between those 2 lines. So I'm going to come in, make it, or just trim it up. Now I've got a cylinder. It's a little bit loose, missed it. As Dale Nish used to always tell me, there's only 2 fits, 2 tight and 2 loose. I'm going to make this one just a little bit larger. Now, a simple fix in your own shop. One, I've got wood here. If we were getting to the end of the wood, I might be concerned about it. But you could also probably just take a piece of paper towel and fit that. So that's getting real close, still big. This shoulder's in the way. I don't want to hit that shoulder, so I'm going to peel cut that out of the way. I'm trying to get this tight enough that it jams on, and I won't have to have the tailstock up for everything if I choose to remove it. That's a way tight jam chuck, but I don't think that this would be splitting. What I need to watch out for, I've got a hole this deep in there. So any shape that I've got, I can't get narrower than 1.125 right there. But it also means I could use any of this. There's also the part from the Forstner bit. The tip of the Forstner bit's probably going another 1/4 of an inch. For overall height, I probably don't want to be much below about that surface there. My simple shape that I normally do, the tower shape, is a good shape. So I can lose almost 3/4 of an inch off the top of there before I need to actually start worrying about it, but it doesn't have to be there. I can keep the revolving center in there for security. The tower shape, going to cut a taper first. We're talking about like a cooling tower, a steam cooling tower. So they're tapered. We'll get the height set. Each of those cuts arc towards center. I'm going to leave that nub on there for now. We'll come back to that as we get to the overall shape. Now I want to have a roughly about a 1/3, 2/3 split in the cove that I'm going to cut. And I'm going to go back to that upside down cut on my spindle roughing gouge. In order to shape this. Watching that big wall of end grain as I come up on that. Come back, switch over using wing C to B. I'm not underneath because it's not as comfortable on this side, and that's the only reason why I'm not on the back side of that gouge right now, but I could go there if I needed to. Here it's coming from the tailstock down the wall there. That's a very comfortable position for me to be in. A couple of compression rings because this has a long bevel on it. Still need to come just a little bit further towards the end. I've got a couple of pencil marks still there. Again, very simple shape, almost Rudiasonic styled Scandinavian. On the bottom, I'm going to cut a little chamfer. That will lift the piece up off the table and let you know that it wants to be held. We'll put a chamfer here. I got the top almost dead flat, and I don't like a dead flat top, so we'll come in and change that shape. This wood here is just about served its purpose. Again, slicing large diameter to small diameter. Come back and clean that up. I'm going to cut an OG curve across the top because I'm not real fond of dead flat, and that is a 2/3 of that is a cove in an OG curve. Cove, cove, cove. So 2/3 the diameter is a cove. Then the handle kicks the opposite direction and shapes a bead. Very shallow on both. They tend, OG curves tend to look best when they're stretched out, not when they're compressed. And a good handy design tool is often just a zip tie, and you can bend them in I don't have one, obviously, but you can bend them in a nice bowl shape, or you can twist them one way and the other way, and you get an S shape. An OG curve is an S shape, but we call it an OG because when you get it right, you say, oh, gee, that's a nice curve. But no, it goes back to the Greeks, probably even further than that. But at this point, this would all be sanded. That chamfer's a little small. It doesn't match the big one I put down on the bottom. This would be sanded. If you're going to apply a finish on the lathe, that would be the time that we would apply the finish on the lathe. Then I should be able to, we'll reduce the speed because I'm on a jam chuck. Should be able to reduce the speed. Now I'm going to try and separate this. I'm using my spindle gouge as a parting tool, and I did. I separated it just slightly longer. You can see that in the overhead view. You can see the nub there just slightly longer than the piece. That way, if this little piece plucks out and it tears fiber, hopefully when I make my finish cut here, I'm at the surface that I want, and I don't have to come back and make a finish cut from here to there. So that would now, the funnel would again take a drop of glue around that surface, line the grain up, put the two together, turn it upside down, fill it with salt, set it right back up, and you get a nice little piece for your table. Pepper, instead of 3 30-seconds, 5 30-seconds. That's the only difference, a little bit bigger hole. It's hard to get pepper flakes down that hole. Pepper doesn't come out as quick as salt, but 5 30-seconds tends to work good enough. This is the destination, but what I want you to take home is the journey. And that's why I am so descriptive along the way of where we get here. It's not the project. Thank you, each and every one of you.